He came to collect a debt. That was all. In and out. 2 minutes. The kind of errand a man like him sends other people for on ordinary days. But his driver had taken the wrong turn, and the corridor of that building was quiet, and that is the only reason Zarin was still standing there, coat unbuttoned, one hand resting at his side, waiting, when he heard it. The voice was small. The kind of small that belongs to someone who has not yet learned that some questions are too heavy for children to carry. Mommy, you keep saying you are fine. But I hear you crying at night. Did Daddy hurt you again? The corridor went absolutely still. Zarin did not move. He stood exactly where he was, one foot already pointed toward the exit, and he listened to the silence that followed that question. The particular silence of a woman who does not know how to answer her child without breaking both of them at the same time. He had heard confessions in this life. He had sat across tables from men who begged, men who lied, men who did both in the same breath. He had been in rooms where the temperature dropped because of something he said. He had built an empire on the ability to feel nothing and keep moving. He had not felt anything in his chest in a very long time. Not until now. He told himself he was leaving. He told himself this was not his business. He was very convincing. He almost believed himself. Then he turned around. Welcome back to Cross-World Romance Besties. Please like, share, and subscribe, and drop in the comments where you are watching from, because this story is about to do something to your heart, and I want to know you are here with me for it. Now let us go. Her name was Saad Mensa, and she was the kind of woman who had learned to make peace look easy even when everything underneath was quietly falling apart. She was 31 years old, originally from Accra, Ghana, now living 3 years deep into a life and soul that had started with hope and had slowly, without her fully noticing, turned into something she did not recognize anymore. She was beautiful in the way that exhausted women are sometimes beautiful, the kind of beauty that has nothing to do with effort because there is no energy left for effort. Deep brown skin that caught light without trying. Natural hair she kept in a protective style most days because mornings did not belong to her anymore. They belonged to getting Lumi fed and dressed and delivered to school with a smile on both their faces before the day had a chance to say otherwise. She had a full, warm figure that she moved through the world in with the quiet self-consciousness of a woman who had been told in too many ways to take up less space. But her eyes were the thing, dark and deep and carrying something older than her years. Something that had seen too much and was still, somehow, choosing to stay soft. She worked at a small community health clinic 4 days a week, not because it paid well, because it barely did, but because it was the one place in her life where she felt genuinely useful, where her hands did something that mattered, where nobody looked at her with that particular expression she had learned to dread at home. Her daughter Lumi was 5 years old and was, without question or competition, the greatest thing Saad had ever done. Lumi had her mother's eyes and her own entirely original personality, which at 5 years old expressed itself primarily through an inability to whisper, an obsession with anything the color yellow, and a habit of asking questions that made grown adults suddenly need to sit down. She was the kind of child strangers smiled at on the street without knowing why. The kind of child who walked into a room, and somehow the room felt more inhabited. She had her mother's warmth and none of her mother's fear, and Saad thanked God for that every single night. Felix Mensa was the reason for the fear. On paper, Felix looked like a reasonable man, moderately handsome, well-dressed, the kind of man who knew how to perform charm in public and save the other version of himself for closed doors. He had married Saad 6 years ago in a small ceremony in Accra surrounded by people who said what a good match, what a solid man, what a lucky girl. Saad had believed them. She had wanted to believe them. That is the thing about certain kinds of people. They are very patient in the beginning. The changes came slowly enough that she kept finding explanations for them. He was stressed about work. He was having a difficult year. She had said the wrong thing at the wrong moment. She had not been patient enough, understanding enough, quiet enough. She became very good at finding reasons that kept the fault on her side of the room because the alternative, that she had walked herself and her child into something dangerous, was a thought too enormous to hold and still function. By the time Lumi was 3, Saad had stopped calling her mother as often. Not because her mother would not have listened, but because she was not ready to hear herself say the words out loud. Saying it out loud made it real. And real meant she would have to do something about it. And doing something about it meant dismantling the entire life she had built in a country that was not her own, with a child who needed stability and no financial cushion large enough to land on. So she stayed. She smiled at school pickup. She wore what she needed to wear to cover what she needed to cover. She told herself next month would be different. She told herself this on a very regular basis. She had not told anyone about the crying. She had not known Lumi could hear it. Now, right now, if you are watching this and something in Sada's story feels familiar, please know you are not alone. Drop a heart in the comments and keep watching, because this story is about to turn in a way that will remind you that help sometimes comes from the most unexpected direction. Like this video if you are already feeling something, and let us keep going. The building where it happened was a mid-rise on the quieter edge of Mapo District. Unremarkable from the outside. The kind of building that held several different lives stacked on top of each other without any of them knowing much about the others. Zarin had come because a man on the fourth floor owed money to someone who owed money to him, and the chain of debt had become irritating enough that he had decided to handle it personally rather than send one of his men. This was unusual. Zarin did not typically appear in person for small collections. He had an entire organization built for exactly this kind of task. But it had been a particular kind of week, and there was something clarifying about doing a simple thing with your own hands when everything else felt complicated. He was in the corridor outside the fourth floor stairwell when he heard the voice. He was not supposed to be on the third floor at all. He had taken the wrong stairwell exit, realized it, and was about to correct his direction when the sound stopped him. A child's voice, clear and careful, and carrying the specific gravity of a question that had been waiting a long time to be asked. "Mommy, you keep saying you are fine, but I hear you crying at night. Did Daddy hurt you again?" He stood completely still. Through the thin gap of a door that had not quite latched closed, he could hear breathing. A woman's breathing. The controlled, careful kind that people do when they are trying not to cry in front of someone they are trying to protect. Then a voice. Low and warm and cracked at the edges in the way that voices get when they are holding too much weight. "I am fine, baby. Mummy is fine." "But Mummy," Lumi said, with the relentless clear-eyed logic of a 5-year-old who has decided the truth matters more than comfort. "You always say that. And then you cry when you think I am sleeping." Her voice dropped slightly, became something older than 5. "I am not sleeping, Mummy. I hear you." The silence that followed that statement was the loudest thing Zarin had heard in a very long time. He was not a man who involved himself in other people's lives without a very specific reason. He had built his entire empire on the principle of clean lines. What belongs to you, and what is not? What is your problem, and what is not? Sentiment was expensive. Sentiment cost people things they could not afford to lose. He knew all of this. He had built his life according to all of this. He stood in that corridor for 11 seconds. He counted, and then he did something that surprised even him. He memorized the apartment number on the door. He found his actual debtor on the 4th floor, handled the matter in 4 minutes, descended the stairs, got into his car, and said nothing for the full drive back to his office. His assistant Juno, who had been with him for 6 years and had learned to read the quality of his silences the way other people read weather, did not ask a single question. He simply watched his employer stare out the window at Soul passing by and filed the observation away for later consideration. Back in his office on the 22nd floor of a building that had his organization's name nowhere on any signage, Zarin sat at his desk for 40 minutes and did not open a single file. He thought about a child's voice in a corridor. He thought about the particular sound of controlled crying. He thought about a door that had not quite latched. He thought about the word again and what that word contained. Then he called Juno in. "The family in apartment 314, he said. "I need everything." Juno did not ask why. That was one of the reasons he had kept his job for 6 years. What Juno brought back the following morning was a file that sat on Zarin's desk, like something with weight. He read it once, set it down, and read it again. Saad Mensa, 31, Ghanaian national, resident in Seoul for 3 years on a spouse visa tied to her husband's employment contract. Worked part-time at the Mapo Community Health Clinic. One daughter, 5 years old, enrolled in a nearby kindergarten. No family in Seoul. One close friend, a Nigerian woman named Bizi who worked in Hongdae. No savings account in her own name. No registered property. No independent financial standing in the country. Her husband, Felix Mensa, 35. Mid-level logistics coordinator for a freight company with ties to a distribution network that Zarin recognized immediately because it was a network that operated on the outer edges of territory he had been watching for months. Not central. not important enough to have been dealt with yet, but known. Zarin leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Felix Mensa was not just a bad husband. He was a small, careless man who had, without knowing it, positioned his wife and child inside a web that had much larger threads running through it. And he had signed Sada's name on a financial guarantee 2 years ago, buried in a contract that she almost certainly had never seen, that made her technically liable for a portion of a debt that the distribution network was carrying. She did not know. Juno had confirmed she did not know. Zarin thought about a 5-year-old standing in a corridor with yellow somewhere on her clothing, asking her mother a question that a 5-year-old should never have to ask. He thought about the word again. He closed the file. Find me a reason to cross her path, he told Juno. Something natural. Something she will not question. Juno looked at him for exactly 1 second longer than usual. Then he said, "Yes, sir," and left. Juno was a good assistant. He did not say what he was clearly thinking, which was that in 11 years of working for Quan Zarin, he had never once been asked to arrange a natural crossing of paths with anyone. Zarin did not do natural. Zarin did direct, efficient, and purposeful. The fact that he was asking for natural meant something had already shifted that Juno did not yet have the full picture of. He went to arrange it, and privately thought that things were about to become very interesting. The opportunity came 3 days later in the form of a broken car. Not Sada's car. She did not have one. It was the kindergarten's after-school pickup van that broke down 2 blocks from Lumi's school on a Wednesday afternoon, leaving 6 children and 1 flustered teacher standing on the pavement in the light October cold while parents were called and arrangements were hastily made. Zarin's car happened to be passing. His driver happened to slow, and Zarin, who had been in the back seat reviewing documents and had looked up at exactly the right moment, saw a woman in a dark coat crouching down to zip up a small girl's jacket against the wind, her hands quick and practiced, her voice saying something that made the child laugh even in the inconvenience of the moment. He told his driver to stop. He got out of the car. He was not a man who attracted neutral reactions. Even in civilian clothing, which today was a dark coat over a fitted black shirt, Zarin carried something around him that made spaces rearrange themselves slightly when he entered them. He was tall and lean with the kind of face that would have been beautiful if it were not so guarded. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that processed everything and gave back very little, the particular stillness of someone who had learned very young that movement is information and information is power. People on the street clocked him and found other places to look without quite knowing why. The teacher saw him approach and instinctively stepped slightly in front of the children. Saad looked up from buttoning Lumi's coat and saw him for the first time. She did not step back. She did not look away. She looked at him with the careful, steady assessment of a woman who had learned to read rooms and people quickly because her safety had sometimes depended on it. She took him in, the car, the coat, the quality of his stillness, and she filed her read away without showing it on her face. He looked at her, and something happened in his chest that he did not have immediate language for. "Can I help?" he said. It was not quite a question. His voice was low and even and carried the particular quality of someone who was not accustomed to the possibility of no. Saad kept her hands on Lumi's coat. "We are fine," she said. "Thank you." "Mummy," Lumi said, looking up at Zarin with the completely unfiltered curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Your car is very black." Zarin looked down at her. "It is," he said, after a pause that was almost imperceptible. He sounded slightly surprised, as though the observation had caught him off guard, which it had, because children almost never caught him off guard, and this one had done it in 4 words. "Is it your favorite color?" Lumi asked. "Lumi," Saad said quietly. "It is a practical color," Zarin said. Lumi considered this with great seriousness. "Mine is yellow," she informed him. "Yellow is not very practical," he said. Lumi looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed. It was the kind of laugh that arrived without warning and filled the space around it completely. Saad watched something flicker across the man's face. There and gone so quickly she almost missed it. But she did not miss it. She was very good at reading faces. It was a skill she had developed out of necessity. The teacher, who had been watching this exchange with cautious uncertainty, accepted when Zarin's driver offered to make 2 trips to get the remaining children home safely. Saad accepted a ride for herself and Lumi with the wariness of someone who had learned that free things often had price tags written in very small print. But Lumi was already asking Zaren's driver what the buttons on the dashboard did, and the evening was cold, and she was tired, and she made a practical decision. She sat in the back with Lumi between them and looked out the window for most of the ride. She gave her address without looking at him. He gave it to the driver without writing it down. She noticed that. When they reached her building, she said, "Thank you," gathered Lumi, and got out. She did not look back. She did not offer her name. She found out 3 days later that he already knew it. It came in the form of a package delivered to the clinic where she worked. Inside was a medical reference book she had mentioned to a colleague 2 weeks ago in passing, saying she had been meaning to buy it, but had not gotten around to it. There was no note. There was no name on the sender details. Just the book, wrapped simply, addressed to her by name at the correct clinic address. She stood at the reception desk holding it for a long time. Her colleague Beezy, who had come to pick her up for lunch and had witnessed the delivery, watched Sada's face go through approximately 7 expressions in 30 seconds. Beezy was Nigerian, 5'2", possessed of an entirely fearless personality and opinions she shared whether invited or not, and she had been Sada's closest friend in Seoul for 2 years. She was also very observant. "Who sent it?" Beezy said. "I do not know," Sad said. Beezy looked at the quality of the packaging. "Sad, that is not a nobody wrapping." Sad put the book down on the desk. Then she picked it up again, because leaving it felt wrong, and she could not entirely explain why. Beezy watched her. Then she said, very carefully, "Is there something you want to tell me?" "No," Sad said. Beezy continued watching her. Later, Sad said, "They went to lunch. And if you are thinking what I am thinking right now, that this man just found out where she works and sent her something she mentioned to someone else entirely, then you are paying attention, and you should be. Drop a comment right now because I need to know, are you Team Zaren already, or are you still cautious like Sad? Like this video because we are only getting started, and it is about to get so much deeper." She saw him again a week later. This time it was not arranged. Or if it was arranged well enough that it did not look like it, which is arguably the same thing and arguably worse depending on your perspective. She was at the small market near her building on a Saturday morning. Lumi riding the front of the cart with her yellow rain boots on because it was not raining, but Lumi had decided the boots were appropriate anyway. And Saad was comparing the prices of 2 different brands of sesame oil with the focused energy of a woman managing a budget that had very little room for error. She heard him before she saw him. Or rather, she felt the quality of the space changed the way it had changed on the pavement outside the school. That particular atmospheric shift that happens when someone enters a room and the room adjusts. She looked up. He was 3 meters away, examining a display of fruit with the focused concentration of a man who was definitely not there for fruit. He was wearing dark trousers and a simple gray sweater, and he looked, somehow, both completely out of place in a Saturday morning market and entirely comfortable in his own presence. 2 men she had not initially noticed were stationed at comfortable distances behind him, not looking at him, which meant they were absolutely looking at him. She looked back at the sesame oil. She was here first, she decided. "Mr. Lumi said loudly. Saad closed her eyes briefly. "Hello," Zaren said, appearing beside the cart with the particular calm of a man who had not been spotted doing anything worth explaining. He looked at Lumi. "Yellow boots today. It is not raining," Lumi informed him very seriously, "but it might." "Practical," he said. Lumi pointed at him. "You said that word before. About the car. I use it frequently," he said. Lumi decided this was satisfactory. She held out a small apple she had taken from the display, without Saad noticing. "Do you want this?" "Lumi," Saad said. "She is offering hospitality," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite amusement, but lived next door to it. He looked at Saad directly for the first time. "Your book arrived." She met his eyes. "How do you know what I wanted to read?" He looked at her steadily. "You mentioned it." "I mentioned it to my colleague." "You were not there." A pause. Small. Precisely controlled. He said, "I am thorough." Saad looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that has a question and an answer already forming inside it at the same time. "You know where I work?" she said. "Yes." "You know my name?" "Yes." She kept looking at him. There was no fear in it. There was something more interesting than fear. There was the look of a woman who is deciding what category to put something in and has not yet found the right one. "Why?" she said. The question hung in the air between them. Simple and enormous and requiring an honest answer that he did not entirely have yet. He said, "I am still working that out." It was, She thought later while cooking dinner with Lumi sitting on the counter, narrating her own version of what was happening in the pot. The most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. And it unsettled her more than a polished answer would have. Felix came home that evening in a bad mood. She knew it before the key turned in the lock. She had developed, over 3 years, the particular sensitivity of someone who reads the quality of footsteps in a corridor the way other people read weather forecasts. Heavy and uneven meant she needed to have dinner ready and Lumi in her room, and everything quiet. She managed 2 of the 3. Lumi was mid-sentence about yellow boots when the door opened. Felix looked at the kitchen, at Lumi on the counter, at the state of the stove, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Why is she not in bed? It is past her time." "It is 6:30, Saad said, keeping her voice even. I said what I said. Lumi had gone very quiet in the way that children go quiet when they have learned that quiet is safer. She was watching her father with those dark, steady eyes. Not scared. Processing. Filing. Saad lifted her off the counter and said, "Go and wash your hands for dinner, baby." Lumi went. She looked back once. Saad gave her a small nod. She disappeared into the hallway. What happened next is not something that needs to be described in detail. This story will not give that kind of thing more space than it deserves. What matters is that later, much later, when the apartment was quiet and Felix was asleep and Saad was sitting on the bathroom floor with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up and her face pressed into a towel, she heard the softest possible knock on the bathroom door. "Mummy." Just that. One word. Barely a whisper. Saad lowered the towel. She breathed. She put her face back into something that a child could look at without becoming more frightened. She opened the door. Lumi was standing in the hallway in her yellow pajamas with the small elephant on the pocket, holding her own pillow with both arms. Her eyes were very wide and very awake and looking at her mother with an expression that was too old for 5. "Can I sleep in here with you tonight?" Lumi said. Saad pulled her in. She sat on the bathroom floor with her daughter in her lap, and Lumi's pillow crushed between them, and she held her. She held her so carefully. The way you hold something that is the most important thing you have, and you know it. She made a decision on that bathroom floor. She did not know yet what the decision would cost, or what it would require, or how on earth she was going to do it. She just knew that when she had looked at Lumi's face in the doorway, something had completed itself inside her. Some last calculation that had been running for 3 years had finally arrived at its answer. She was leaving. She did not know when. She did not know how. But she was leaving and she was taking Lumi and she was not looking back. She just needed a plan. And right now she had a bathroom floor and a child falling asleep on her and nothing else. But something, some stubborn thing deep in her chest, felt like the beginning of something instead of the end. Now I need you to stay with me because what is coming next is the part where everything starts to move and you do not want to miss a single second of it. Hit that subscribe button right now because there are more stories coming and you will not want to be late for any of them. And tell me in the comments, are you crying already because I warned you this story was going to cost you something? Keep watching. The next morning, Saad dropped Lumi at school, walked to the clinic, treated 7 patients, ate half a sandwich at her desk, and spent her lunch break in the small courtyard behind the building working out the mathematics of escape. The numbers were not encouraging. Her wages went into a joint account that Felix monitored. She had been quietly, carefully, over the course of 8 months, moving small amounts into a separate account she had opened without telling him. The balance was not enough to rent a place in Seoul. It was not enough to buy 2 plane tickets to Accra. It was enough for approximately 2 weeks of careful living and nothing more. She needed more time. She needed a plan that had more architecture to it than good intentions. She was still sitting with this problem, turning it over, when her phone showed an unknown number. She almost did not answer. Then she thought about the book, and the market, and the particular quality of a man who was thorough. She answered. "Ms. Saad," the voice said. It was him. Low and even and carrying that quality she had already cataloged without meaning to. "I would like to speak with you." Not on the phone. She said nothing for a moment. "I know that is an unusual request," he said. "Everything about you is unusual," she said. A pause. Something in it that might have been the beginning of a smile happening on his end. "Are you free tomorrow evening?" Lumi could come. She noted that he included Lumi. She noted that he knew including Lumi mattered. She said, "I do not know anything about you. You know my car is very black," he said, "and that I find yellow impractical." She almost smiled. "That is not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It is not. but I will give you answers tomorrow if you come. You can choose the place. She chose a restaurant 2 blocks from the clinic. Public. Well lit. Near her workplace where people knew her face. She texted Beezy the address and the time and said, "If you do not hear from me by 9, call everyone." Beezy texted back a series of escalating emojis and a voice note that Saad did not have time to play but could guess the content of. He was there when she arrived. He stood when she walked in, which surprised her because men who expected the world to move around them did not usually stand for anyone. Lumi, who had been told they were having dinner with a friend, spotted him immediately and said, "It is the black car man," loudly enough that the neighboring table looked over. Zarin looked at Lumi. "Hello, yellow boots. I am not wearing them today," Lumi said seriously. "These are my dinner shoes." She held out one foot to demonstrate. "They are very sensible," he said. Lumi sat down and immediately picked up the menu and held it in front of her face with the gravity of someone making a very important decision. Saad sat across from him. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at him directly. "Tell me who you are," she said. He told her. Not everything, but enough. He told her his name. He told her he ran an organization in Seoul that operated outside certain boundaries that she understood immediately to mean the law. He told her he was not asking her to be involved in any of it. He told her that he had heard her daughter's voice in a corridor 3 weeks ago and had not been able to stop thinking about it since. Saad watched his face while he talked. She was good at watching faces. "Why does it matter to you?" she said. "What you heard. Why does a man like you care about something like that?" He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not empty, but full of something being chosen carefully. "Because I know what it sounds like," he said finally, "when a child has been carrying fear for a long time. I know that sound. I recognized it. And I recognized what it cost the person who caused it." She looked at him. There was something in his face, just briefly, that told her that sentence had a history she had not been given yet. Lumi appeared from behind the menu. "I want the one with the egg on top," she announced. "Okay, baby," Saad said, without looking away from Zarin. He ordered for all 3 of them with the efficiency of someone who had made decisions in more complex situations. He remembered that Lumi had pointed to the one with the egg. He asked Saad, quietly, "Are you allergic to anything?" She said no. He ordered accordingly. She noticed everything. Dinner was strange and warm and nothing like what she had been bracing for. Lumi talked for 40 of the 60 minutes they were there, covering topics including, but not limited to yellow, the name she had given a classroom beetle, her theory that rain clouds were actually just very tired, and a detailed critique of the kindergarten snack policy. Zarin listened to all of it with the focused attention of a man sitting in a high-stakes meeting. He asked follow-up questions, reasonable ones. Lumi considered him more and more acceptable as the evening went on. Saad watched the 2 of them. She thought about the kind of man who could listen to a 5-year-old explain beetle naming conventions with genuine attention. She thought about what it meant that it surprised her. She thought about how low the bar had been set for her, and for how long, and she felt a very quiet, complicated grief about that in the middle of the restaurant, and put it away carefully. On the walk out, Lumi slipped her hand into Zarin's without asking anyone's permission. He went very still for exactly 1 second. Then he held her hand. Carefully. Like he was not entirely sure what the protocol was, but was not willing to do it wrong. Saad saw his face in that second. She felt something move in her chest that she was not ready to name. In the car on the way home, with Lumi asleep against her arm and the city moving past the window, she looked at her phone. Beezy had sent 14 messages. She turned the phone face down. She looked out at Seoul. She was not a woman who made decisions with her feelings. She had learned that lesson. But she was also not a woman who lied to herself about what she had seen. And what she had seen tonight was a man who had arranged to know her, had been honest about the fact that he had arranged it, had told her what he was without asking her to pretend he was anything different, and had held her daughter's hand like it was something to be careful with. She did not trust it yet. She was not supposed to trust it yet. But she filed it. She held it. She did not throw it away. 2 days later, Zarin called Juno into his office and said, "The debt that Felix Mintz's name is attached to. I want to know every detail of how his wife's name ended up on that guarantee." Juno produced the documents within the hour. Zarin read them for a long time. His expression did not change. The temperature in the room changed slightly, in the way it did when Zarin arrived at a conclusion that was going to have consequences. "She signed nothing," he said. "Her signature was reproduced without her knowledge." Forged. Yes, sir, Juno said. She is legally bound to a debt she did not agree to, in a country where her visa is tied to the man who forged her name. Juno said nothing. He had learned when speaking added nothing. Zarin set the documents down. He looked out the window at the city. How much is the debt? Juno told him. He thought for a moment. Buy it, he said. Juno paused. The entire debt, sir. All of it. That would effectively make Zarin the holder of a financial obligation that Saad did not know she was attached to, which was a complicated position for reasons Juno was very aware of and did not yet understand the full reasoning behind. She does not know about the guarantee, Zarin continued. When she finds out from me. Not from a legal notice. Not from the network. From me. Juno wrote it down. And the husband, Juno said carefully. Zarin was quiet for a moment. Leave him alone for now. He is going to make his own mistakes. They always do. He was right about that. Felix made his mistake 11 days later. It was a Tuesday evening, and Saad had stayed late at the clinic for a staff meeting that ran over. She had texted Felix to say she would be late, and could he please collect Lumi from the aftercare program. Felix did not reply. He did not collect Lumi. He did not answer his phone. The aftercare coordinator called Saad at 7:15 to say that all the other children had been picked up and Lumi was still there. Saad was 20 minutes away by taxi. She called Beezy, who was closer, and Beezy was through the door of the aftercare center in 11 minutes flat, which was a personal record and a testament to the specific energy of a Nigerian woman who has been told a child is waiting alone. Lumi was sitting at a small table drawing when Beezy arrived. She looked up. Auntie Beezy, she said, I drew a cloud. It looks tired. Beezy gathered her up and held her very tight, and said something in Yoruba under her breath that was not entirely polite. By the time Saad arrived, Lumi was fine, eating a biscuit Beezy had produced from her bag because Beezy always had food, and explaining the cloud drawing in detail. But Saad stood in the doorway of the aftercare room and looked at her daughter sitting there, and something she had been managing very carefully for a very long time became unmanageable. She did not cry in front of Lumi. She sat with her and talked about clouds and finished the biscuit that Lumi offered her half of, and behaved exactly as required until Lumi was home and fed and in bed and asleep. Then she sat in the kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, and something in her simply stopped holding. She was not the only one awake at 11 o'clock. Her phone was on the table. She had not called anyone. She had not texted Beezy, who would have come immediately. She had not done anything except sit and breathe and feel the full weight of 3 years pressing down. When her phone lit up, it was a message from a number she had not saved, but had memorized without meaning to. It was a single line. Are you all right? She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed, no? He called immediately. She answered without thinking. She did not say much. She did not have to. He asked her once, quietly, what happened. She told him, briefly, the outline only. Lumi was left alone. Felix did not come. She did not say anything beyond that. She did not need to because there was a particular quality to his silence on the other end of the line that told her he understood the weight of what she was not saying. He did not offer solutions. He did not tell her what to do. He said, you are not alone in this. She sat with that sentence in her quiet kitchen. It was the most devastating thing he could have said, not because it frightened her, but because she realized, sitting there, that she could not remember the last time anyone had said something like that and meant it. She is asleep, she said after a while. Good, he said. I am going to be fine, she said. I know you are, he said. That has never been in question. She did not know what to do with that either. She said good night. He said good night. She put the phone down and sat for a while longer in the quiet, and felt something she had almost forgotten the shape of. The feeling of being seen by someone who was not asking anything in return for seeing her. Now, if your heart is doing something right now, then you are exactly where I need you to be. Comment below what you would have done in Sada's position. And subscribe because we are reaching the part of this story where everything is about to break open and you do not want to miss it. Felix found out about Zarin on a Thursday. Not about everything. Not about the debt. Not about the file. Not about the calls. He found out the small thing first, which is often how these things go. He came home early, found a name written on a paper on the kitchen counter where Saad had jotted down a restaurant recommendation she had been given, and the name was connected to a phone number that was connected. When Felix put it into the search that men with suspicious minds always eventually run, to a man whose name produced results that made Felix's face change color. He was sitting at the kitchen table when Saad came home. She knew immediately. She had the same competence with reading rooms that she had with reading faces. She put her bag down. She kept her voice level. She asked where Lumi was. He said at the neighbors. She noted that he had removed Lumi from the room before she arrived, which told her the level of what was coming before he said a single word. She was not going to give him what he wanted. She stood her ground in her own kitchen, and she kept her eyes clear, and she said, "Whatever you think you know, say it plainly." He said it. Not plainly, but with the particular ugliness of a frightened man who is covering his fear with volume. She listened. She did not defend herself more than was true. She had had dinner with someone once, in a public restaurant, with their daughter present. She said that. Exactly that. She said nothing else because there was nothing else to say, and also because she was, somewhere in the part of her that had already made the decision on the bathroom floor, noting everything. Every word. Every choice he made. She was building a record in her memory in real time. When he was done, she said, "I am going to get Lumi from next door." He grabbed her wrist. She looked down at his hand, then up at his face. And in that moment, her phone rang. The ringtone was just a ringtone. But the number on the screen was the number she had not saved. And Felix, who had been doing his research, recognized it. He let go of her wrist. She answered the call. She said, "Hello." Her voice was entirely steady. Zarin said, "I am outside." She looked at Felix. Then she picked up her bag and walked to the door and opened it. He was standing in the corridor. Not dramatic. Not aggressive. Just present. Dark coat. Hands in his pockets. Eyes that looked at her face first, and then at her wrist, and then back at her face with a quality of attention that made the air in the doorway feel very different. Felix had appeared behind her. The two men looked at each other. There are rooms in the world that fill with a certain kind of energy when two particular forces occupy them at the same time. This corridor was one of those rooms. Felix was not a small man, but he had the immediate involuntary response of a man who has just understood that he has been measuring himself against the wrong scale. Zarin did not say a word to Felix. He looked at him once with the patient, evaluating look of a man who is deciding whether something is worth his time, and made his decision visible in the way he then turned fully to Saad and said, "I will take you to get Lumi." Saad stepped out of the apartment. The door closed behind her. In the corridor, walking toward the elevator, she felt Zarin's hand come to rest at the small of her back. Light, not possessive, the kind of touch that says "I am here" and nothing more than that. She did not move away from it. They collected Lumi from the neighbor's door. Lumi, who had been told she was going for a small adventure, accepted this information enthusiastically and immediately asked Zarin if the black car was outside. He said yes. She said good and put on her jacket with great efficiency. He took them to a hotel residence that he kept for people under his protection. Not his home. A safe and clean and comfortable place. 2 bedrooms, stocked kitchen, doormen who knew what they were for. He showed Saad where everything was. He showed Lumi that the window had a view of a lit street with a noodle shop that had orange lanterns that she immediately decided were her favorite lanterns in Seoul. Then he stood in the living room while Lumi examined the lanterns and said to Saad, quietly, "You do not have to tell me anything tonight. You do not have to make any decisions tonight. Just sleep." She looked at him. "I know about the guarantee," he said. "The one with your name on it. I know you did not sign it. I bought the debt 2 weeks ago. You owe me nothing. I want you to understand that. Whatever you decide, you owe me nothing." She stood completely still. "You have been holding this for a long time," he said. "You do not have to hold all of it alone anymore." And there, in a hotel residence living room with her daughter at the window counting orange lanterns, Saad Minsa, who had not cried in front of another adult in 3 years, looked at Kwan Zarin and felt something in her chest come completely undone. She did not fall apart in a dramatic way. It was quieter than that. Her eyes filled. She kept her chin up. One breath, then another, controlled and careful. He watched her do it and did not look away and did not try to fix it. Just let her have the full weight of the moment without asking her to make it smaller for his comfort. She nodded once. Then she said, "Thank you." Her voice was steady. He nodded back. He left them there. She sat on the edge of the bed after Lumi was asleep, and she thought about the fact that the most dangerous man she had ever encountered was also the gentlest thing that had happened to her in 3 years, and she did not know what to do with that except sit with it. She sat with it. "Now, are you still here?" Drop a comment right now because we have arrived at the part of the story that is going to change everything, and I am not ready to carry it alone. Subscribe if you have not yet, because what comes next involves danger, a decision, and a moment that you will not forget. Stay with me. She stayed in the residence for 4 days. She told Beezy, who arrived on the second day with food and approximately 1,000 questions, and then sat quietly for a long time when Saad told her the version she was ready to tell. On the 4th day, Zarin came. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table while Lumi was napping and said, "I need to tell you something that you will not be comfortable hearing." She said, "Tell me." He told her about Felix. Not just the cruelty she already knew. He told her about the distribution network and the contracts and the financial exposure she had been carrying without knowing it. He told her that the network had become aware that their guarantee holder's wife had moved out and was in an undisclosed location, and they had sent people to Felix asking questions. He said, "Felix gave them this address." She looked at him. He said, "You were never in danger. My people were already here. But I need you to understand that he gave you to them." Without hesitation. To cover his own position. The kitchen was very quiet. She thought about 6 years. She thought about a wedding in Accra. She thought about a bathroom floor and a small knock on the door in yellow pajamas. She said, "I want to file for divorce." He said, "I know a lawyer." She said, "I want full custody." He said, "That will not be a problem." She said, "I want to do this myself. I do not want it to be something you arranged or paid for. I need it to be mine." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "The lawyer's name is Park Jui. She is the best family law attorney in Seoul. I will give you her number. What happens after that is yours." She nodded. Then she said, "Zarin." He looked at her. "Why are you doing this? And I do not mean the lawyer or the debt. I mean all of it. Why does any of this matter to you?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I had a mother who cried at night when she thought I could not hear. I was 6 years old. There was nobody in that corridor who turned around." The kitchen held that sentence. She looked at his face. The guarded, careful, unreachable face of a man who had built 34 years of walls and had just opened one window. She said, "I am sorry." He said, "I turned around for you." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Just that. Just her hand on his. She felt him go very still in the way he had gone still when Lumi held his hand. That single second of a man who does not know the protocol but refuses to do it wrong. Then he turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that in the quiet kitchen for a while. Felix did not accept the divorce quietly. Felix accepted nothing quietly. He showed up at the clinic. He called her phone from block numbers. He went to the kindergarten once, which was the mistake that cost him most immediately, because one of Zarin's people was outside the kindergarten at all times, and the footage of Felix arriving and arguing with the teacher at the gate went directly to Park Jui's office and was filed before the day was out. In court, the documentation of 3 years was laid out with the clinical precision of a very good lawyer who had been given everything she needed to work with. Saad had kept records. She had not known why she was keeping them for most of that time. She had just known that some part of her had been preparing quietly long before the rest of her was ready to move. Felix's lawyer was aggressive. Felix's lawyer called her stories exaggerated and her timeline inconsistent. Felix's lawyer was speaking to a judge who had Park Juhi across the room, and a file that included medical records and school observation notes, and a forged signature on a financial document. And the judge's face throughout had the particular quality of someone who has already decided and is listening to the rest as a formality. Saad sat in that courtroom with her hands folded in her lap and her face composed, and she did not look at Felix once. She looked at the judge. She looked at Park Juhi. She looked at the file that her own hands had built over 3 years of very quiet, very determined preparation. The ruling, when it came, was complete. Full custody of Lumi. Felix's visa status flagged for review, pending investigation of the forged signature. The financial guarantee declared void due to fraud. She walked out of the courthouse into October air, and she stood on the steps, and she breathed. Beezy was beside her, holding her hand so hard it was almost painful. "It is done," Beezy said. "It is done, my friend." Saad nodded. Her eyes were wet, and she let them be. Lumi, who had been with a trusted friend during the hearing, was brought to her by Zarin's driver 20 minutes later. She ran up the steps in her yellow boots because she had made an executive decision about footwear that morning. She ran into Saada's arms, and Saad held her, and held her and held her. Over Lumi's shoulder, she saw Zaren's car at the bottom of the steps. He was not in it. She looked around and found him standing at the edge of the small plaza to the left of the courthouse steps, coat on, hands in his pockets, watching her the way he always watched her, as if she was something he was still working out the full dimensions of. She carried Lumi down the steps and crossed the plaza. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her face. Something in his expression shifted. The particular shift of a man who has been managing his own hope very carefully and has just been allowed to set it down. She said, "Thank you for the corridor." He said, "Thank you for the window." She did not entirely understand that yet, but she thought she would. Lumi, who had been listening to this exchange with interest, looked up at Zaren. "Are you going to eat lunch with us?" she asked. "It is a celebration." He looked at Lumi, then at Saad. Saad said, "It is a celebration." He said, "Then yes." They had lunch at a bright restaurant 2 streets from the courthouse, and Lumi ordered the one with the egg on top, because she always ordered the one with the egg on top, and she told Zaren a long detailed story about what had happened at school that week involving a disagreement about whose cloud picture was better, and he listened to the entire thing with his full attention, and when she reached the resolution, which involved a compromise and 2 stickers, he said, "That was well negotiated." Lumi looked at him seriously. "I know," she said. Saad watched the two of them and felt something settle in her chest. Something that had been unsettled for so long that she had almost forgotten what the settled version felt like. That evening, after Lumi was in bed and the apartment they had moved into, small and bright and entirely theirs, was quiet, Saad sat at the window and Zaren sat beside her, and the city was doing its ordinary beautiful soul things outside the glass. He said, "I need to tell you something." She said, "Tell me." He said, "I have been in this city running something that has no clean version. I have made choices that do not have clean versions. I am not asking you to pretend any of that is different from what it is." She waited. He said, "But I want to find out if there is a version of my life that has you in it. And I am asking you if you want to find that out too. Not quickly, not on my schedule, on yours." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about corridors and wrong turns and a child's voice asking a question no child should have to ask. She thought about the window he had opened and the hand he had held and the presence in a courthouse plaza of a man who had not come inside because he had known, without being told, that the victory needed to be hers. She thought about a 5-year-old counting orange lanterns. She thought about a man asking a small child about cloud naming conventions with genuine interest. She thought about what it felt like to sit in a kitchen and have someone say you are not alone in this. She said, "I am not a simple thing to be in a life." He said, "I know that." She said, "Lumi is not a simple thing." He said, "Lumi is one of the most uncomplicated good things I have encountered in a very long time. That is different from simple." She looked at him, at the careful, guarded face with the one window in it. She said, slowly. He said, "Your pace." Entirely. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw, the same way she had when she was deciding something, and she felt him breathe. She said, "Earn it." He turned his face slightly and pressed his lips to her palm, brief and certain and everything. She let him. The weeks that followed were not without difficulty. An empire does not restructure itself because its leader has decided he wants something different. Zaren's world had sharp edges, and there were people in it who watched his attention shift toward a woman and a child and made calculations about what that meant for their own positions. A man named Cho Dae-sung, who ran a competing network that had been waiting for any sign of weakness, made his move on a Wednesday morning. The move was not aimed at Zaren directly. That would have been too obvious, and Cho Dae-sung was not an obvious man. The move was aimed at Saad. 2 men followed her from the clinic. Not close enough to frighten her immediately. Close enough for Zaren's people, who were always present, to clock them within 4 minutes and send the alert. Zaren was in a meeting on the 22nd floor when his phone vibrated. He looked at the message. He stood up from the meeting without a word, which told the 4 men around the table everything they needed to know, and he was in his car in 3 minutes. Saad had noticed the men by the time the alert was sent. She had the awareness of a woman who had learned to notice. She did not panic. She walked steadily toward the clinic, kept her phone in her hand, and called Zaren. He answered on the first ring. "I see them," she said. "I know," he said. "Keep walking. Do not turn around. My people are already moving." His voice was the same, even in low and completely controlled. But she heard something underneath it that she had not heard in his voice before. Something with heat in it. something that was not calm at all, but was keeping the shape of calm for her. She kept walking. The two men never reached her. She did not see what happened to them. She heard footsteps behind her change, and then disappear, and then Zaren's car was at the curb, and the door was open, and he was leaning across from the driver's side with his jaw locked, and his eyes doing something she had never seen them do. She got in. He looked at her face. He checked her over with his eyes, quick and thorough, and she let him do it because she understood what it was. She said, "I am fine." He said, "I know." But his jaw did not unlock and his hands on the wheel were not their usual controlled still. She said, "Zaren." He looked at her. She said, "I know. I see it. I am fine." He breathed. Just once, a long controlled exhale. Then he said, "Cho Daesung." She said, "I do not know that name." He said, "You do not need to. I am going to handle it." She looked at his profile. She said, "When you say handle it." He said, "Within the law where I can. Outside it where I have to. I am not going to pretend I have a clean version for you." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Handle it." He looked at her. She said, "Handle it, and then come home." His expression did what it sometimes did. That barely visible shift. The window opening. He said, "Where is home?" She held his gaze. She said, "Wherever Lumi is counting lanterns." He said nothing. He did not need to. That evening, after the details of Cho Daesung were handled in ways that would not be described here, but that removed the threat with the efficiency of a man who had been running a city's shadows for 11 years, Zaren sat in the small bright apartment, and Lumi climbed onto the sofa beside him with a book and said, "Read this one." He looked at the book. It was about a cloud that was afraid of rain. He read it. All of it. With the full focus, he gave everything. Lumi leaned against his arm by the second page. By the last page, she was asleep. He sat very still. He looked at this small, sleeping child leaning against him with her yellow-socked feet tucked under her, and the thing in his chest that had started in a corridor with a question did something it had not done in a very long time. It expanded, like something that had been very carefully contained suddenly had room. Saad came from the kitchen with 2 cups of tea and stopped in the doorway. She looked at them. She stood there for a moment, her hand against the door frame, her eyes doing the thing they did when she was feeling something too large for one expression. Then she crossed the room and sat on his other side and handed him his tea and looked at the city through the window and said nothing. He said nothing. They did not need to. The months that followed were the kind of months that quiet people build quietly. Zaren began the long, deliberate work of restructuring the parts of his organization that could be restructured. It was not fast, and it was not clean, and there were days that cost him things he had built over years. He did not complain about it. He did not make it dramatic. He simply worked at it the way he worked at everything, methodically and without asking for credit. Saad watched him do it. She did not ask him to be something he was not. She did not require him to have a clean history. She required him to be honest, and he was, in the careful, precise way of a man who has decided that honesty is the only currency he has left that means something. Lumi, for her part, had made her own decision about Zaren long before anyone asked her to. She had decided somewhere around the orange lanterns and had simply been waiting for the adults to arrange themselves accordingly. She called him Ren. She had decided his actual name was too serious for everyday use, and Ren was better. He did not correct her. He answered to it with the naturalness of someone who had not known he was waiting for a name until he was given one. On a Sunday morning 6 months after a corridor and a child's question and a man who turned around, Zaren was in the kitchen of the small bright apartment making the tea the way Saad liked it, which he had learned without being taught because he paid attention to everything. And Lumi was sitting at the table drawing something with deep concentration, and Saad was at the window with the light on her face. He put the tea on the table beside her. She looked up at him. He sat down. He reached into his coat pocket, which he was still wearing because he had arrived 20 minutes ago and had not gotten around to taking it off, and he placed a small box on the table between them. She looked at the box, then at him. He said, "I am not going to do this dramatically. You do not need drama from me. You need honesty. So this is what is true. I came down a wrong corridor, and I heard a voice, and something in me turned around that has not stopped turning in your direction since. You are the most courageous person I have ever known, not because you survived something, but because you chose to stay soft after it. You kept your daughter gentle and warm and entirely herself in conditions that would have closed most people. You did that. I watched you do it. And I want to spend every year I have left being the person who turns around in corridors for you. Both of you. Lumi had stopped drawing. She was watching with very round eyes. Sada's eyes were doing the thing they did when she was carrying something too full for one expression. She said, Zarin. He opened the box. It was not the largest ring in the world. It was not designed to announce wealth. It was exactly what she would have chosen for herself, which told her more than the ring itself did. She said, You paid attention. He said, to everything. She breathed. In. Out. She said yes. Lumi made a sound that was half celebration and half the particular triumph of someone whose plan has finally come together. She jumped from her chair and put both arms around Zarin's neck from behind and announced, I knew it, into his ear at a volume that was entirely unnecessary. He put his hand over her small arms and held them there. Saad watched the two of them. Her daughter. This man. The apartment full of morning light. She thought about a bathroom floor and a decision made in the dark. She thought about a corridor and a turned-around man. She thought about the long, complicated road between those 2 points and everything it had cost and everything it had given back. She reached out and picked up the ring. She put it on herself, which was not traditional but was entirely her, and then she held out her hand and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. She said, Earn the rest of it. He said, Every day? Lumi said, Can we have the egg ones for breakfast to celebrate? They had the egg ones for breakfast. 14 months later, on a quiet Saturday morning with the kind of light that Seoul does in early spring when everything is gold and unhurried, Saad stood in front of a mirror in a dress that was the color of deep water and held Beezy's hand while Beezy cried enough for both of them. You are supposed to be the calm one, Saad told her. I am calm, Beezy said, dabbing her eyes with the precision of a woman protecting her makeup. This is my calm face. Lumi appeared in the doorway in her flower girl dress, which was yellow, because there had never been a question about that, and looked at both of them and said, Why is Auntie Beezy crying? Happy tears, Saad said. Lumi considered this. Then she said, I have my yellow on. Can we go? They went. The ceremony was small. Intentionally small. Zarin had offered her anything she wanted, 100 people, a venue that the whole city would have heard about, anything. She had said, I want the people who matter. He had said, Tell me who they are. She did. They stood across from each other with the light coming through tall windows, and the people who mattered arranged quietly around them, and Lumi standing beside her mother with her yellow dress, and her serious face, and her flowers held in both hands with enormous responsibility. The vows were not long. Neither of them had ever needed many words for the things that mattered most. He said, I turned around for you. I will keep turning around. She said, I watched you hold her hand. That is when I knew. I choose you for every corridor after this. Lumi, who had been quiet and ceremonious for approximately 6 minutes, which was a personal record, said, And me, at a volume that made the small gathering laugh with the kind of laughter that has tears in it. And you, Zarin said, looking down at her. Always you. Lumi nodded, satisfied. She had organized this outcome from the beginning, and it was right that it be acknowledged. 3 months after the wedding, on a Tuesday evening that started exactly like every other Tuesday evening, Saad sat at the kitchen table while Lumi drew clouds at the other end and Zarin stood at the window with his phone, and the city did its city things outside the glass, and she said, I need to tell you something. He looked at her. She slid a small white object across the table. He looked at it. His face did not move for a moment. Then it did. It moved in a way she had not seen it move before. Something broke open in it, gently, completely, the way things break open when they have been waiting without knowing they were waiting. He crossed the room in 3 steps. He crouched beside her chair. He looked at her face. She said, You are going to be somebody's father. He put both his hands over hers. His throat moved. She had never seen him at a loss for words. She decided she liked it. Lumi looked up from her drawing. What happened? Saad looked at Zarin. He looked back at her. He said, You are going to be a big sister. Lumi put her pencil down with the gravity of someone receiving a serious promotion. She looked at them both for a long moment. Then she said, They better like yellow. The room laughed. The whole warm lit room laughed, and outside the city continued, ordinary and oblivious. And inside that kitchen, 3 people who had found each other through a wrong turn and a child's question and a man who had the grace to turn around, held the particular quiet of a family that had been built from something broken and had become, against all reasonable odds, something whole. Lumi went back to her drawing. She drew a cloud. It did not look tired. She drew a sun beside it, and two big figures, and one small figure with a yellow dress, and underneath it in her careful kindergarten letters, she wrote our family. She showed it to Zarin later. He looked at it for a long time. He said, "This is very accurate." Lumi said, "I know." He put it on the wall. It stayed there. And somewhere in the city, in a corridor that meant nothing to anyone else, a man who had taken a wrong turn and heard a small voice and turned around instead of leaving, continued every day to prove what he had said on a Sunday morning with morning light on the woman he loved. I turn around for you. Every single time. Thank you so much for staying until the very end of this story. If you made it here, you are an absolute bestie, and I see you completely. This story was made with love and with the belief that the right person will always turn around. If Saad and Lumi and Zarin did something to your heart today, please like this video and drop a comment telling me your favorite moment, because I read every single one and they mean everything to me. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that love after hard things is still possible. Subscribe to this channel because we have more stories coming that will find you exactly where you are. One love. We will see you in the next one.